Wonderful. Well, it's 12 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and make a prompt start for everyone who's joined already. Welcome to everyone who's on the line, and welcome to my lovely co-hosts, Charlie and Joe. Thank you so much for joining us today on Social Mobility Day. If I could ask anyone who is joining just to mute their microphones whilst, if they aren't already, that would be great, just so we don't get any feedback on the line. This is being recorded, so if you haven't been able to join in real time, hopefully you're able to watch this back at your own leisure and kind of, yeah, use it for some food for thought internally in your organizations. I guess just a bit of background. Today we're talking about how can the legal sector drive financial inclusion. We've brought this panel together to explore a link that's too often missing from conversations about equity in the legal sector, and that's the role that financial literacy plays in shaping access, confidence, and crucially, progression. So for many of you on the line, you may know me already. For those that don't, I'm Carla Hoppe. I'm the founder of Wealthbrite. And I've spent the last few years speaking with hundreds of lawyers across the UK through our work. And what we're hearing again and again is that financial stress is quietly influencing career decisions, performance, and mental health. And what we see in our data is that it's hitting junior lawyers the hardest. So to share a few of the data points, 89% of lawyers between the newly qualified and 2 years PQE say they regularly worry about money. And that's either every day, very often, or often. Nearly half of all lawyers across the grades profess to relying on credit at the end of the month, not just for the points, but because they've run out of money. And in the last 18 months or so, we've started to collect socioeconomic status data as part and parcel of our annual surveys. And what we're seeing are trends and a dividing line between those who respond to our data based on socioeconomic status. The dividing lines that we see fall squarely around the levels of financial resilience between those that come from higher and lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So that's the extent to which people have pre-existing levels of savings and their ability to save for their futures. And the other area where we see a dividing line is in the level of financial aspiration between those that come from higher and lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And I think this is hopefully this is going to be a really unique and different conversation for you to be having on Social Mobility Day as we look to uncover what is the link between financial confidence, financial literacy, and financial resilience, and this question of social mobility. I want to say up front that today's conversation is not about placing blame. It's about asking very practically, what can we do to change the status quo? What would it look like for firms to make financial education a core part of how they grow and support inclusive teams? And so I guess that's enough from me. I want to now turn the floor over to my wonderful panel co-hosts. I'm joined by two absolutely brilliant speakers today. I'm really delighted that they've both given up their time to be here on this day. First of all, Joanna Hughes, you've worked both in and across the sector to expand solicitor apprenticeships, talk about the different routes and open up new routes of access into law. Do you want to just give folks on the line a little bit of an insight into your passion around this topic and tell us a bit more about what your focus and your role is?
Yeah, sure. So I was a solicitor at a big international law firm for 25 years. I am now fully focused since 2022 on being a champion for solicitor apprenticeship route into the profession because of the great power it has to improve socioeconomic diversity in law. I have lived experience myself of social mobility. And this is a topic that I feel quite strongly about, even though I don't have all the technical knowledge. But I'm all about creating psychological safety to talk about these issues. There's no shame in it. I'm 53 and I'm happy to confess, you know, how emotional I can still get about it. So, yeah, let's have a good chat.
Amazing, thank you. And Charlie, you entered the profession through a Silex apprenticeship. And I guess, I'm delighted that you're here to share your own personal story about the experience of entering the profession through, I guess, what some might regard as a non-traditional pathway, but actually probably an emerging and very much more popular pathway for a lot of people. So do you want to just tell people a bit more about where you are today and again, your interest in this conversation?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me here today. I qualified as a paralegal through the apprenticeship route, and now I'm proud to say that I work in the regulatory team at Kingsley Napley. This is a really important topic for me because I have, like Joanna, lived through and I'm still currently living through social mobility. But also, due to the practice area that I'm in, I think that it's really important that those seeking to enter the profession, but also who are working in the profession, are aware of the financial requirements that are obligated upon them as a solicitor.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for making that point because it's something I wanted to share with everyone on the call today. That, of course, getting it right when it comes to personal financial management and therefore thinking about the importance of financial education and literacy isn't just good for people on an individual level. And it isn't just good for aiding the progression of socially mobile talent. It's actually really fundamental in terms of protecting the integrity of the profession. Because as you've mentioned, Charlie, actually, the professional code of conduct includes a requirement upon all of those who are regulated to ensure that they manage their finances appropriately as part of those professional conduct rules. And this is something I think actually a lot of people are unaware of. But it just highlights the importance of this conversation. So let's get going in this meaty conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. But before we do, I want to just flag for those on the line, I'm just going to do a quick sense check of how you guys feel when it comes to understanding the connection between finances and social mobility. So hopefully you can see on my screen, I've just shared a quick Slido. I'd really welcome if you could controversial ask perhaps, but get your devices out and do a quick scan of this QR code. Or if you're on a desktop, feel free to use the slido.com link and use the hashtag number below. I'd really love to see where do you sit on this spectrum of confidence and understanding the link between finances and social mobility. It's really valuable just to get a sense of like where people are at already in their awareness of the issues. And as we move through the course of this conversation, what I'd say to you, I'm going to ask the same question at the end of the session. If you feel unable to answer with any greater degree of confidence, it would suggest to me that you have questions that remain unanswered. So again, I want to prompt you to be aware of the fact that through the Slido link that you've just scanned, and thank you to those who have answered and participated, there is a sort of confidential anonymous Q&A feature. Hopefully you can see that. If anyone's having difficulty, please pop it into the chat and Eleanor and my team can help us out. But please use the anonymous Q&A feature to pop any questions that you have as we move through this discussion. I really want to make sure that this is a really valuable and engaging conversation for everyone on the line. And if you're not confident asking your own question, but you see someone else asking one, you can upvote for questions as they come through. So keep an eye on that part of the conversation as we go. Brilliant. Well, looking at the results, it seems like we've got a bit of a mixed range of aspects and perspectives, but we're kind of roughly centering in the middling grounds of people's feelings of confidence on this. And you know what? I'm not surprised by that. And what that means is hopefully you're going to take away a lot of value from this conversation. So I guess let's get to it. Jo and Charlie, opening question for both of you. And perhaps, Charlie, maybe you want to answer this first, but how do financial literacy and social mobility intersect in your experience?
Thank you so much. So for me, I would say that financial literacy and social mobility are really deeply connected, especially from my own experience and those of us who are seeking to build a professional life without the financial safety nets that perhaps others or peers within the profession may take for granted. I come from a low-income single-parent household, and I didn't have access to informal financial education that you would expect your parents to credit, or budgeting for an income that could be quite variable, or even managing debt or not seeing debt as a bad thing, weren't conversations that often happened around the dinner table. So for me, when I was entering the legal profession, especially on the apprenticeship scheme, I was doing more than just learning on the job. I was also learning how to completely manage a new financial reality. I'm the first person in my household to pursue any kind of professional qualification. So I think on the whole, for people from socially mobile backgrounds, it's not an optional skill, financial literacy. It's foundational for us to progress and build the skills that we need to be good lawyers.
Yeah, thank you. That really resonates with me. Jo, what about you? What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, me too. I agree with everything Charlie said. So I think there's 3 points I wanted to make. One was the emotional aspect about it, which actually can never go away. But unless you have help from people like you, Carla. But actually, there's two sort of more concrete points I wanted to make. It's a lack of background in financial literacy, as Charlie's just said, but I can see it from both ends. So when I was a child, I was in a working class background. I'm the only person from my family who's ever gone to university. And, thinking about it, I didn't know, and I don't think my parents knew what the city of London was as opposed to the place London. Compare that to my 4 sons who have literally been brought up talking about mortgage rates, pensions, interest rates, or in the case of my husband, how derivatives work. I mean, literally, that is the reality. Little kids who are children of partners in law firms talk about derivatives. It's true. And that is a big disparity between my experience as a child and my children's experience. So it's real. The second concrete point I wanted to make, without laying any blame, but just shining a light on the fact that there can be a lack of awareness of richer people at the top of organizations about the reality for younger people. So who can afford a nanny, who can't, these kinds of issues. And it's key to making people be able to work or not.
Absolutely. And I think, what both of you have said is really loudly reflected in the stories and the data that we have from working with young lawyers at the start of their careers. So, I hear regularly from people this kind of perception that actually there is a disconnect between their lived experiences today and those of the lived experience of those who are, in senior leadership in organizations. And in fact, I was having this very conversation with a wonderful partner at a law firm just yesterday, and we were chatting about the fact that, when she was coming through her career, reality was that, yes, she was able to get on the property ladder fairly early in her career. And whilst it might have felt like, the mortgage was pretty sizable at that time when she first got on the property ladder, actually the pathway that she was following in law was such that in quite quick amount of time, she felt more than comfortable covering off the cost of housing and then, all the rest of the things that came with it, childcare, sort of these like life milestones that people kind of aspire to move through. And yet the reality is today, for a lot of people at the start of their career, well, first of all, a lot of those big milestones are feeling very, very distant for them, almost impossible. And I've certainly had young people come through our training programs, particularly those from a socially mobile background, who have almost said to me, and in fact, not almost, they have said to me, well, it's all so difficult. What's even the point in trying? Right. And, and I think there is this kind of a narrative, and there's a lot of noise in the media at the moment about just how hard it is economically. And I suppose when you come from a background where perhaps you haven't had exposure to some of these like conversations naturally at home, similar to both of you, like I think the conversations we were having at home when I was growing up, I was very aware of money at home. And I would say, actually, I was very aware of how far money could go or couldn't go. But I had never heard the word investing or investment in my entire life growing up. So, and this kind of idea of getting on the property ladder, again, was quite a distant idea in my household. My grandmother, sadly passed away last year, but she lived in social housing her entire life. And so again, this kind of idea of inherited wealth and inherited knowledge, I think there are some real stark differences depending on where you grow up. So thank you for that. I suppose one of the thoughts I had and one of the questions I wanted to put to both of you was, and maybe Jo, you might have a perspective on this first, but I think, or I worry sometimes that when we talk about the issues around financial literacy and social mobility, or the barriers that people face, that people might be tempted to think that this is just a problem or an issue for those, very young apprentices coming through their doors. In your experience, and is this relevant to those who are also not apprentices?
Yeah, absolutely. So I hope we'll come on to speak about it later, but of course, for year one solicitor apprentices, it's a real issue, and we can talk about that. But of course, it carries on as you get older, and as the milestones creep up, it actually feels harder and harder to talk about these things. So just speaking from personal experience, my trainee cohort all bought houses sooner than me, not bought flats. And, they were also comfortable to take 100% mortgage, because at that time in the 90s, it was a good thing to do. There is no way that I would have taken that kind of risk. You're much more risk averse, even if you're told by a financial advisor it's fine to do. But sort of more personal things, such as they would say, well, why aren't you, why aren't just with the deposit, right? And it's like, I need to save up for a deposit, and I can't do that because I'm also saving up for a wedding, even though it was only a wedding for 38 people, because my parents can't pay for a wedding. So I need to save up for a wedding, which means I can't save up for a deposit. And, that was in my early 30s. So it's not just entry level.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, again, some of the stories I've heard, and, we've been really lucky at Wealthbrite to work with some fantastic organizations. I think, folks on the line will see that Aiken have joined, and I can see some folks in the room there. We've worked with Aiken for a while now, and the reality is that some of the law firms, I think latest calculation I did, we now have 30 law firms in the City of London who are paying newly qualified solicitors £150,000 or plus. Now, it's a debate for somewhere else as to the pros, the merits, the cons, the challenges that come with that. But what is striking to me is that type of pay grade means a lot of things to people, but it especially means things to those who maybe don't come from a background where they've had access to that level of income before. I've always found it a bit strange that firms don't seem to tell people that they're in the self-assessment tax regime once they hit that level of earning. So people don't find out until they get a letter from HMRC saying you have failed to file a self-assessment tax return. Some people may not realize that they are on the wrong tax code, and then they don't find out until they get a nasty tax bill, or they find out, obviously everybody's always very happy if they get told by HMRC that they've got a tax refund coming, but 9 times out of 10 it goes the other way around, unfortunately. And actually, I was chatting to a friend recently, and he's a young qualified solicitor in a Magic Circle law firm. He comes from a Bangladeshi background, and I don't know, there's so many intersections between finances and diversity. And today we're talking a little bit about social mobility, but I think we also have to be alive to how that cuts across other kind of characteristics. And we think about ethnicity and the links between finances and ethnicity and socioeconomic status, well, then we start to see a compounding effect. And this individual, he was saying to me, I feel othered at home and at work, because all of a sudden his income level is such that he has vastly outpaced anybody who has ever come before him in his family. And yet at work he doesn't necessarily always feel like he knows what to do. And actually for him, talking to me, he's saying, I feel a really strong sense of duty to do right by this financial opportunity that I've been given, but I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do. And I think it's really important that firms are aware that those at the start of their career, and I think this is where there's some generational divide, are actually really hungry for knowledge. They're hungry to learn, they want to learn, and they want to do something. Charlie, you might be able to kind of bring this more to life for people. What are some of the financial barriers that you've seen some solicitors at the start of their career and paralegals like yourself at the start of their career face? And I guess what sort of support would you be looking for to kind of help you overcome those barriers?
Thank you. So obviously I chose the apprenticeship pathway, and that allowed me to earn whilst I was learning. For many, they choose this route because it's their preference, but for me it was not just a preference, it was a necessity. I wouldn't have been able to fulfill my needs whilst I was at university without taking on full-time work and ending up in thousands of pounds worth of debt without any income. So the apprenticeship model wasn't just appealing, but it was the only realistic route. And obviously there are alternative routes into the profession. And for those from socially mobile backgrounds, they're not going to be able to take unpaid internships, or work experience doesn't offer any form of payment, which in turn will limit their exposure compared to their peers. And also, this is something I have experienced, and I know that those entering the profession do also experience, is a hyper awareness, is that if something goes wrong financially, there's actually no safety net for us to fall back on. And I think in terms of the support available that firms can give to lawyers entering the profession, is that a lot of the financial wellbeing sessions that we see across the sector feel like they are designed for people who perhaps are already financially stable. They talk about things such as pensions, investing, or tax planning, all which are very important topics, but they're not always immediately relevant to someone who perhaps is just trying to be able to manage their rent, food bills, and perhaps even student loan repayment. So I think in terms of support, the education that firms are providing needs to be tailored to the real needs and different starting points throughout one's journey. So for example, they could offer sessions on budgeting and managing fluctuating expenses at the start of your career, honest conversations about debt and how to handle it without any shame, and then probably guidance on how to build confidence with money when you've never had that financial security. And as we mentioned earlier, it is actually a requirement by the SRA to disclose serious financial difficulties. So I think if firms aren't proactively educating their staff members, especially those that are junior and from a socially mobile background, then people are unknowingly putting their careers at risk. For those from socially mobile backgrounds, financial hardship can seem like the norm for some. So it's really vital that we support and inform those coming into the profession, not just assuming that they already have an awareness.
Yeah, and I really want to thank you, Charlie. That's really powerful. And I think you've touched on a lot of really important points here about that level at which financial support is offered. One of the things that I'm very aware of is that finances can often feel like a foreign language to people. And that's not necessarily just the case for folks from a socially mobile background. Actually, for a lot of people, and I think maybe that's something that is a bit of a trend, but even within the legal sector itself. I put my hand up when I started in my legal profession. I remember saying the words to people, I am a words person, not a numbers person, and I think that sometimes we carry narratives and beliefs about our literacy or comfortable levels of comfort with financial concepts as lawyers. And so actually, I think sometimes when we talk about money and finances, we do need to be mindful of the vocabulary that's being used and making it fit for the audience to which we are speaking. And as you rightly pointed out, folks at different stages of their career, at different, lived experiences, will bring with them different levels of literacy and confidence around those concepts. So I think tailoring the approach to the audience is a really great recommendation for folks if they're thinking about creating spaces, safe spaces to learn.
Can I add something,
Please.
Carla? So the point that you made about the kind of figures that NQs are earning, one's immediate response, particularly people outside the legal industry, might be, hey, I have little sympathy for you if you're earning those kind of figures. But the point is, if we're serious as a profession about levelling up across all different backgrounds, we need to take account of progression as well as entry, right? It's not just about getting in, it's about getting on. And that kind of lived experience of that individual is very much played out. Those of you who follow the work of the 93% Club, they're releasing a study today. And that point about being othered in between is a really serious issue. And, if functions such as yours can help iron that out, I see it as key.
Yeah, absolutely. And another point I wanted just to add to yours, this focus and attention that's given to those kind of very high NQ salaries. I think sometimes it's right that we focus on it, and it's right that we think about what it means to aid progression of socially mobile talent should they find themselves earning those kinds of amounts. And I think firms that fall within that category, and even if they're in the 100+ category, should be thinking really carefully about how to help those in those circumstances really, steward that opportunity and aid that progression. But I really always feel it's important to make the point that, of course, law is an incredibly broad church. And not everybody is on that kind of money. And so, when I first started Wealthbrite, I remember people saying to me, oh, boo-hoo, you're going to help rich lawyers earn more money. I said, no, that's not what it's about. This is about highlighting the fact that actually, the legal profession today, we have a huge swathe of new talent entering in the legal tech functions. I think it's like 40% of the profession is actually business services. And, the rates of pay and levels of earnings and the backgrounds from which people across all those segments of the organisation that make up the legal profession are really varied, and rightly so, because it reflects the diversity of the people that we serve in the profession. But I think it's therefore really kind of, I guess the challenge I'd put out to firms is that if we're talking about opportunity and inclusion in 2025, I think we've really got to pay attention to this point about looking at the progression of socially mobile talent. So just as you said, Jo, getting on as well as getting in. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that takes me really nicely to a sort of a follow-up question, which was, if you're sitting here listening to this conversation and you're thinking, okay, I get it. people from different backgrounds, different awareness levels, different issues they're maybe facing. But at the end of the day, it's personal finances. Is this really something firms should be doing? Or is it actually up to the individual to go and kind of, make an effort to upskill themselves? I mean, where do you sit on that dividing line between responsibility of the individual versus responsibility of the employer? Jo, start with you, maybe.
Yeah, because Charlie will have a much more fulsome answer, so I'll just be her warm up. It absolutely should not be an individual's responsibility. It's basically asking people to self-disclose their background. And I appreciate socioeconomic background isn't a protected characteristic yet. It will be if I get my way and a few others. We're going to try and add it to the Equality Act. But that's not appropriate. You should offer the same accommodations, the same opportunities to all your joiners, all your people, regardless. And then those that wish to take up the opportunity will take up the opportunity. It shouldn't be on an individual. No. Charlie?
Thank you. So I hate to be that person, but I would say that it has to be a shared responsibility. And one person alone can't dismantle the barriers that are there. Fundamentally, firms do have a duty of care to their employees. And if they care about retention, inclusion and performance, then they really need to be investing in the financial well-being of their teams, particularly those from less advantaged backgrounds, such as those from socially mobile backgrounds. But then we turn to the regulatory point again, that the profession must acknowledge that financial literacy is not only there as a support tool, but as a regulatory necessity. As Carla mentioned earlier, it is under the SRA's character and suitability framework, and it is a regulatory requirement to disclose serious financial difficulties like bankruptcy or insolvency. So this means that as a legal professional, you must be financially aware enough to recognise when perhaps you are approaching these thresholds. And then that puts the onus back on the firms that they have a responsibility to educate their staff about this. So I think for those from a lower socioeconomic background, financial hardship might not feel like a red flag initially. And this is because it just feels like normality. So as a profession, I think that there needs to be more education and guidance around really what is financial hardship and how that ties into your regulatory obligations. It must be clear, empathetic guidance on what needs to be disclosed, why it matters and what help is available.
Thank you, Jolly. That was a really fantastic, fulsome response. I am minded to agree with you that I think that there is, of course, I think I personally would say it is a bit of a dual responsibility, because I think actually, yes, as lawyers, it's important that we know, we often talk about growth mindset in the context of our career. And actually the same is true when we come to consider some of those other skills that perhaps we're not taught at school or at university or as we move through, our legal qualifications, but actually that we remain open and curious to continue to learn and continue to learn around things like how to manage finances. So I think it's important that we kind of create a culture and environment in organizations which celebrates that curiosity and that willingness to learn, and creates spaces and normalizes the conversation around money. I think actually sometimes what I find is that there's probably more people talking about money than firms would even really recognize or realize. And actually what people need oftentimes more than anything is simply the permission to sort of speak out loud or speak in an open forum things that are being whispered, at the water station or by the printers in the office, right? Or over a lunchtime catch up with a friend. So I think, certainly when we've talked to lawyers about, what they are looking for from firm level support, one of the things we hear consistently from people is about role modeling behaviors. So I think, there's a lot that firms have done really well to kind of champion initiatives in their organizations around mental health and breaking the taboo around mental health. I think the same can be done championing storytelling from those with a wide range of lived experiences. It doesn't need to just be highlighting socially mobile lived experiences, because of course we need allies as much as those with lived experiences to share their stories, but really opening up the conversation, spotlighting and championing people in your business who are prepared to tell stories of money lessons they wish they'd learned early, or things that actually they would love to pass on to others, and actually really encourage some of that intergenerational storytelling and learning that I think is so valuable as a means of bringing people together, and recognizing that actually, I think, when we come to talk about finances, actually, it's probably a topic that we've all got a lot more in common than we do apart. Because anecdotally, I can tell you that nearly every single person I have talked to about their own experiences with this would say to you, gosh, I wish I'd learned this stuff earlier. So I think there's actually a real opportunity for firms to kind of harness some of their internal know-how and use that as a leverage point to build confidence and literacy in their people.
Can I say something about storytelling? Because I think in terms of a takeaway, I see some firms on here that I really, really respect, and I know that they'll be listening and thinking, what about a takeaway? That example of storytelling, whether you draw a parallel from the mental health excellent storytelling that's happened, or the socioeconomic background, another hidden, diversity strand that's been so well done. It feels to me like this is ripe for storytelling, and it's a really easy way. It's like an easy win for law firms to do. And I agree, across all levels, across all different financial capabilities. I love your storytelling idea. Well, and it's recommended by the Socioeconomic Diversity Task Force. So, yeah.
It is, absolutely. It's a really powerful way of bringing people together and making it easy for people to feel, I guess, psychologically safe in kind of asking questions and asking for help. And, I want to highlight for people that, this point about asking for help is such a really important one. And we've been really pleased this year at Wealthbrite to be supporting some of the work of the Solicitors Charity. And for those that don't know, the Solicitors Charity, formerly the Benevolent Society, really was set up to help solicitors in distress. And distress can take many forms, but they do have specific forms of support for those in financial distress. And they are due to release their new report, a really big report looking at the impact and influence they've had over the last sort of year. And actually, they've seen a 60% increase in the number of solicitors seeking support around finances. And of course, there's a spectrum and a range of financial challenges that may crop up for people. Charlie, rightly mentioned that from a regulatory standpoint, of course, people will be aware that it's, a no-no from the perspective of being bankrupt or having a county court judgment against you. What people may be less aware of is that actually that regulatory framework, the SRA guidance, also includes, admittedly a rather grey line in their guidance when it comes to examples of financial misconduct. And it includes the line item, are you able or an inability to satisfactorily manage your finances? Now that's an incredibly wide statement. Not very clear what they exactly mean by that, but it spotlights the fact that actually, financial challenges can take lots of different forms, right? And it doesn't necessarily manifest itself as, those really extreme examples that you may have read about in the press, be that financial fraud or, someone stealing from the kitty. Because of course, these days, most firms, particularly all of those who are joining us live, have the rights, controls and systems in place that prevent that. But actually, the way in which financial challenges tend to manifest themselves today are either through the stress, the compounding stress of financial stress on top of workplace stress, that means that people are more prone to mistake or error, or maybe tempted or more vulnerable to take action that's inconsistent with their professional conduct duties. And we've certainly heard stories, and I've been running a series of roundtable events with law firm compliance leaders. And they would corroborate our data about the levels of financial stress. And they've shared stories of things like, unfortunately, people who may be tempted to, inaccurately record timesheets or inaccurately submit expenses because their finances have become unstable to the extent where they are tempted to take action in order to sort of, in their heads, rationalize a scenario where perhaps they get a bonus because billable hours are tied to bonus, right? Or perhaps passing on the expenses because, no one's paying too much attention to what goes through on that front. So I think, firms need to be alive of the variety of ways in which financial challenges can manifest. And again, that is not exclusive to socially mobile talent. That can happen for a wide range of people. But I think it's important to kind of think beyond those big ticket sort of black lines like bankruptcy and county court judgments. So in terms, I want to sort of, Jo, you were about to say something. Please tell me.
No, I wasn't. No,
I was just going to turn in the time that we have left because I want to make time for questions, and I've seen a few come through. I guess, thinking about takeaways, thinking about concrete actions. We talked at the beginning that this wasn't about placing blame. It was about thinking more strategically about actions firm can take. We've talked about storytelling already. I guess, to both of you, maybe a final question, but like, what does good look like when it comes to delivering support in this space? Jo, I know you've been very focused on the practical financial support that can be given to those going through the apprenticeship program. Would you mind sharing some of what that best practice looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, sort of the elephant in the room, speaking honestly, for year one solicitor apprentices, they can sometimes struggle, those that have to relocate in particular, with managing rent with their salary. And so as a City Century community, for those that don't know, City Century is a collaboration of 50 law firms. We are looking really hard at finding solutions for that. So if anyone doesn't know already, we are hosting a BPP flat mixer at the beginning of July so that they can house share. And that's one practical solution, but we're looking at others as well. What can certainly help with that, and this is a real plea to anyone online, I know that some of them listening already offer very generous relocation bonuses. I'm not sharing any secrets because this kind of information is shared online, but some law firms do offer as much as £3,000. It's called a relocation bonus, but it's open for anyone for the same reason that I've discussed it earlier. That's huge. It makes a huge difference to people that don't have a bank of mum and dad. So that would be my first takeaway and request. And the second request, and again, I see two law firms joining us live who are absolutely superb law firms when it comes to taking care of the needs of care leavers, care experienced people. They have particular needs. And I really do implore everybody to think about those high achieving care leavers who are joining your law firms. They have different needs. Yes, they get a bursary from the government of £3,000, but they need your special attention as well so they can compete on an even level.
Thank you so much. Charlie, how about yourself? Do you want to give any thoughts from your perspective? Obviously, you've been through the apprenticeship pathway, but maybe if you can share anything that you've heard from peers and others who are sort of at a similar stage to you.
Definitely. So actually, for a lot of my peers, they followed the traditional routes into law and definitely had very different experiences. They were able to dedicate more time to focus exclusively on their studies and obviously didn't have to worry about supporting themselves whilst working. So some of them could afford unpaid placements or were able to live in central locations and are not having to think twice about the cost. But I think for those that are entering the profession from those more disadvantaged backgrounds, we need to be making sure that any of the internships or work experience programs that we're offering are paying them a real living wage. It's not sustainable to have to give up your part-time job or not work for a week at your part-time job or not work at all to be able to go into a work experience program. And that's because those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds can't afford the costs associated with it, such as staying in a hotel close by to the firm, or the transport in, or maybe even the suitable clothes to wear. So I think that that's something that firms can really do to aid those coming into the profession. But I think looking at it more holistically, I think that there's one practical change that every law firm could start making to make a more financially confident workplace, not just for those from a socially mobile background, as this would benefit everyone. And I think it would be to introduce a structured financial education program, perhaps with the help of Carla, that starts from day one. And therefore, those that are entering into that law firm have the knowledge and have the tools that they need to navigate the financial world. And this could start with the basics, again, targeting all different levels, such as budgeting a junior salary, understanding pay slips, debt, credit scores, because quite frankly, those from socially mobile backgrounds probably don't understand what a lot of those are. I know my own mum won't mind me saying this, but it wasn't until recently that she actually started putting money into a pension, and that's because of the knowledge that I'd gained through my own lived experiences that I was able to pass on to her. So I think overall that firms really need to evolve over time in terms of the knowledge and the practicalities that they are providing to those within their firms. And it needs to be delivered in a clear, accessible language, because again, we can't just assume that everyone knows the terminology that we're using. And I think it would be really great if there was access to confidential, free financial advice or coaching, or maybe a subsidized financial advice or coaching, because financial confidence overall will improve performance, reduce stress, and support long-term career growth.
Thank you, Charlie. Loads of people to take. So that's brilliant. And you know, I think a lot of what you've said, again, I suppose I should say that a lot of what you've shared is, I guess, at the crux of how Wealthbrite came to be in existence, right? You know, I went through the early stages of my career. You know, I didn't opt into my pension in the first few years of my working life. This was, you know, I'm old enough to say I was pre-auto enrollment, but I also didn't understand what it meant. And, you know, I recall at the time that I know my firm had sessions from their pension provider coming in, doing sessions. And I know I attended them. And I also know that I listened, and it really sort of passed over my head in terms of what exactly they were saying. And that's not to criticize. You know, I think that the reality was that actually the information that was being shared was just too advanced for where I was in my level of knowledge and confidence. But of course, I wasn't ever going to say that to anybody, because I didn't want to mark myself out as any more different than I already felt. So I think absolutely firms being alive to this point that there may be differing needs at differing stages of people's career, and actually not assuming knowledge. I was actually going to throw the floor open to say thank you very much to both of you for sharing this, but I was going to throw the floor open to questions at this stage. We have had a couple of questions, and I guess one of them tees off very nicely from where we've just left the conversation, which was, in your experience, or in your opinion, what is stopping us from talking more openly about money in the legal profession? So I wonder, Jo, what's your thoughts on this?
I think it's exactly as you just said. It's a desire to want to fit in, and not to other yourself. I think it's also coming back to something I said earlier, through no fault of their own, but it's a lack of understanding at perhaps more senior levels in some cases, not all cases. I know there's two partners on this call who are very alive to all the issues, but that's not the case with all partners. So yeah, lack of awareness at the top sometimes, and a lack of not wanting to other yourself for those who are affected.
Yeah. Charlie, what about you?
I think from my perspective, in terms of law firms not wanting to engage in this conversation, it's through fear, and they don't want to step on any regulators' toes, for want of a better phrase. They are worried that they might be seen as being given financial advice or recommending institutions, which unfortunately they're not allowed to do. So it would be really good to have a company such as Wealthbrite that is able to come in and give that really important information, and then that will open up the dialogue in a safe environment in which those firms and employees can discuss money.
Without selling products, right, Carl?
I was
You've
going
got
to say,
no products to sell.
I promise I didn't pay Charlie to say that at all. But you're absolutely right, and it is a concern a lot of firms have had and continue to have, rightly so, that they are not allowed to give financial advice to their employees. So they are looking, and I think historically maybe have taken the decision that maybe it's just therefore inappropriate for them to be saying anything. And that's also why I think traditionally firms have relied upon perhaps benefit providers or other existing suppliers to come in to deliver one-off sessions. And I know lots of firms have sort of wealth management companies or IFAs who come in to do sessions. And again, for a lot of people, that will be great, right? Because for them, they will be ready for that kind of engagement and they will be ready. But, you know, for a lot of people, and again, regardless of socioeconomic status, for a lot of people, particularly those at the start of their career, I mean, the reality is they don't have the kind of funds that are going to make them ready for financial advice. Because financial advisors, it's not in their economic interests to work with somebody who is, you know, typically they're looking for assets of over 250,000 and they want income levels of at least 100 plus. So of course, if you're at the start of your career, you're kind of blocked out from that system. And yet at the same time, you know, they are really hungry and excited. As I said, they're looking for places to go to learn. So I think there is a great opportunity for firms to kind of actually play a role in providing trusted resources. I'd like to add very briefly at this point about trusted resources, just something for firms to be mindful of. We ask all the students that come through our programs, where do you currently go for financial education? And the overwhelming majority of people tell us they are reliant on either the family support or social media for their financial education. Now, I hope it doesn't take a huge leap for you to therefore understand how risky and fallible both of those sources will be. Of course, there's great content out there online, absolutely, but there's an awful lot of content that is simply inaccurate and actually quite dangerous in some regards. So I think, you know, if you are a firm thinking about what can we be doing that's different, distinct, unique, and is really there to aid the progression of our people, actually acting as the resource, the trusted resource, can be really one of the most spectacular ways I think you can help people at this stage. There was another question that came through online, and if anybody else has any more questions, please do feel free to pop them in the Q&A. And if you're brave enough and you want to put your hand up or put your video on, please be by all.
Oh yeah, we like that.
We are very welcome for you to do so. A question that came through: have you ever experienced guilt about being a high earner in your family, and how did you deal with that? I don't know if either of you.
Yes, and I didn't deal with it. I didn't deal with it. I avoided it. It's a really good question. A really good question. I wish I'd met you earlier, Carla. That's all I can say. And on meeting people earlier, I wanted to mention this, that you very kindly delivered a session for our year. When I say our, I mean the City Century collaboration of 50 law firms, our year one solicitor apprentices. And it couldn't have felt further away from a financial advisor session. It was quite joyful, it was light-hearted, but very, very content rich in a neutral way. And I had really good feedback from that. So, you know, I'm not recommending you, but but I am, but in that nervous, not law firm recommending way. But you were brilliant, absolutely brilliant with the year one apprentices. So I think that's a really good solution. And like I say, I might have handled my own guilt a bit better if I'd had that kind of training when I was younger.
Thank you. That's so kind. Really appreciate that vote of confidence. Look, I think to answer the question that came in, and then Charlie, I'd love to hear your take on it. One of the questions that we ask we do an annual financial wellbeing and law survey. We will be releasing our third annual survey in October later this year. And I'm really excited because, well, 3 years in, we will start to be able to share trending data across the sector, which is going to be really interesting to see what, if any, shifts and attitudes and changes that we're seeing in financial capabilities in law. But one of the questions we ask consistently is, we ask people to respond to a series of statements about how they feel with money. And one of the things that comes back all the time is, 60% of lawyers feel pressure to spend beyond their means. And, as always with our data, we kind of collect quantitative data, but then we really want to get the qualitative assessment of what's going on, what's driving these answers and these fears, these feelings. And when we brought together lawyers to understand where this pressure was coming from, because I was really curious to ask and answer the question, if you are at the beginning of your career, is it feeling pressured because life is feeling pressured? Or is there something else in the system by virtue of either the profession or where you've come from or something else that's adding to that feeling of pressure? And we heard two really interesting reflections, which I think might be interesting for those on the call. One was that actually sometimes that pressure is coming from family. That sometimes if you are the first person in your family to be in this situation where you've got access to funds, even if it's not those six-figure salary sums, that there then becomes this almost extended pressure from your family environment where it's assumed that you can pick up the tab on things. And even amongst friends, oh, well, you're a lawyer, so, drinks are on you.
Just to potentially add on that, if that's okay,
Yes,
Carla,
please.
that is something that I do currently experience. I love my mum so much. But she is constantly stressing to me the importance of buying a house. I have explained to her many times that it is not feasible at the moment, and I know that I need to buy a house, but there is constant pressure from my mum to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting, right? Sometimes this pressure can crop up from places that people least expect it. And I think it's a reflection of that othering effect that we touched on earlier. The second element of pressure, and this is something firms may not be as well aware of, but we found it quite interesting to hear from solicitors who said, and this tended to be those who were post-qualification on their way through the grades, that whilst, of course, in a lot of places, the NQ salary is published, visibility of salaries as you move through the ranks is quite low. And they were feeling some level of anxiety and stress about the fact that they actually did want to plan ahead. They were trying to set financial goals for themselves, like things like, can I afford to move to a different place to live, a nicer place to rent? Or, can I afford to think about saving for a deposit to get onto the property ladder? And their concerns were, I can't even have a meaningful conversation with a mortgage advisor or a financial advisor because I don't know how much I'm going to get paid. And I can't ask because it's not the done thing to ask. And there's, a sense of secrecy around the salary as people move through those later stages of their career. Now, look, I'm not here to say, oh, everybody should be, publishing salaries all through the ranks. But I highlight it as a point for people to be mindful of when they're thinking about some of the dynamics of the profession that can inadvertently add to this sense of pressure and stress in people's lives. So I leave that there. In terms of the question about dealing with the guilt, I'd say the guilt is real. And different people deal with it in different ways. And to be honest, recognizing it is, I think a really important first step. In terms of what you do, of course, my strong recommendation would be to talk about it. It is not easy. I don't make any bones about that. But the more we have conversations like this, the more I hope we will start to feel comfortable opening up about some of these issues, not just at work, but it also with our family members and elsewhere. So listen, I'm going to leave it there. We've got 1
You
minute.
have one hand up. There
Oh,
was
I
one
have a
hand
hand
up.
up. Do we have a hand up for a question? Apologies. Is that a hand up? Carly, yes, you have a question. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hello, sorry, I don't want to keep everyone.
No, that's
Thank you for the
fine.
workshop. It's been great. Just a quick question, because you've all had like amazing journeys. I just wanted to know maybe like what misconceptions or lessons you've learned along your journey that could help a current legal professional.
Great question. I love that as a closing item. Charlie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, is that just to clarify, is that in terms of financial well-being or just in general?
I would say financial well-being.
Okay, I think for me, the misconception that I've experienced, not through what I think, but through family members and coming into the profession, is that you earn so much money from as soon as you enter the legal profession. And that just isn't true. And I think that we need to be managing the expectations of family members to enable us to feel psychologically safe and not bringing that stress into the workplace. So I think if you feel comfortable enough to have those conversations with your family members and actually explain it's not realistic that every single law firm is able to offer those humongous salaries, especially those coming into the profession, then it will aid you in your success throughout your career because you won't feel as pressured to live up to that expectation.
And my misconception as a mother of 4 children would have to be misconceptions around the affordability of childcare on a qualified solicitor's salary. It's an issue. And sometimes people at the very top think everyone can afford a nanny and they can't.
Yeah, I feel like there's another conversation for us to have. So, and from my side, let me close it out by saying, look, I think I see 3 things in the profession, misconceptions or things that can compound misconceptions around finances. One is that we operate in a high stress environment. In law, right? And unfortunately, that just means that a lot of times people leave things like managing their personal finances as a bottom of the to-do list life admin thing. And I think, my lesson and the lesson I hope to pass on to many through Wealthbrite is that, actually your finances, the money that you work so hard to earn is the thing that is going to set you up later in life for success. And so we need to do a better job of putting up that as a priority. The second thing is that there is a real culture of expertise in law. You are literally paid to be the expert in the room. And therefore, we need to work hard on creating cultures and inclusive spaces where it's okay to say, I don't know and I need help. And I guess that last thing is just the perception of wealth. You're absolutely right, Charlie and Joe, when you both say that actually, I think, you only have to take a look at some of the Instagram profiles of the law firms and it's all shiny buildings and lovely dinners out and fancy drinks events in different places. That is not the reality for everyone. And I think we would do well to kind of manage expectations better, both internally and externally on that. So yeah, hopefully that's something for everyone. Thanks to everyone for such an honest and practical conversation. I think the research is clear, and what we've heard today is that solutions don't need to be complex, but they do need to be intentional. So I guess that just leaves me to say thank you to everyone for joining, and I hope you have a really great rest of your social mobility day. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Carla.
Bye.